Welcome back to the channel. In this short series, we're going to be looking at simple image manipulation in and on computers, and there's two different ways that we can do it. Depending on where you are, we can either use Adobe Photoshop, which looks a bit like this, or we can come over to Google Chrome and use Photopea. Now, the two versions function largely the same, except Photoshop you have to pay for, so it might not be available, whereas Photopea or Photopea is free, but it's web-based. So you access it through your web browser, whether that's Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, or so on. Okay. Now there may be some slight differences, so I'll show you both. For example, because it's free, Photopea has adverts on it, but other than that, most things will be largely the same. Now, starting over in Photoshop, we've got this test image here. Okay. Now we can see on the bottom right-hand corner, okay, we've got our layers panel here. Let's just make it a little bit bigger. Now think of layers as different sheets of tracing paper, okay? And depending on the order in which we stack those layers of tracing paper, that will affect how our final image is ordered, okay? So at the bottom here, this is at the bottom of the stack, and then everything that's on top is on the top layer, okay? So at the moment, we've got our one here called layer one. And in fact, let's double click on that to rename it. And let's call it turquoise background. Just so we know what it is. That's really good practice. Okay. Now, if we, for example, were to move this up above here, we can see the effect it has, and it hides other layers because that turquoise layer is getting in the way. So let's move that down. Let's move it back down there. We can press Control Z to undo. If ever we've made a change and we want to go back and undo it, we can use our history tool. Now, come up on the right hand side to here, like this arrow pointing upwards. And so here we can go forward or backwards as many steps as we want. Okay. In Photopea, it's very much the same. Again, we can click and drag our layers. And similarly, let's call this one turquoise background again. Okay. Now, in this first instance, we want to, let's say, get rid of the background of this passport image here. Okay. Now, firstly, let's just zoom in a little bit. So come down to our magnifying glass on the bottom left here. Make sure we've got the positive selected. Let's just click in a few times. Let's just go out a little bit so we can see the whole thing. About there will do. Okay. Let's do the same in Photopea. Magnifying glass. Let's come into about there's fine. Okay. Right, back to Photoshop. So we want to get rid of the white background on this particular layer. Okay. Now, before we do anything else, let's come find it, and it's layer 3 that we want. Let's rename that. Passport on there as well. Just we know it is, and we don't get confused. Because otherwise, with these tiny little icons here, we can't really see what we've got. In a more complex production, you might have 10, 20 layers. So it's really important to keep a track on what is what. Now, when it comes to removing the background, there's a few different ways that we can do it. Okay, if we come down looking on the left-hand menu here and just hover over them, it will tell you what's within each menu, but also within each icon, there are further options available. If we right-click, for example, there are more tools available under the select tools. So we could say, for example, use a rectangle tool and maybe rotate it. But that's not going to be very, very effective. So we come down to the fourth one down, our object selection tool. Okay, so we've got the object selection tool, and this is quite clever at looking for items or objects within an image. So we can move over to here. Oh. So you need to make sure you've got your layer selected here first. So now with our object selection tool, if we hover over and start moving it, coming onto our passport, you can see it outlines it in pink, and that's what we want. If we click on that now, you can see it selected it for us. You can see like the marching ants around the outside. Now, if we press delete now, it's going to get rid of the passport. And that's what we don't want. We want the opposite of that. So let's come back. We can either press Control Z on our keyboards, or we can go back in our history tool up here to get it back. So in essence, we want to select the opposite. We want to select everything except the passport. Okay, so come up to your top menu along here and press select inverse, or we can press Control Shift I, and now that's selected everything else. Okay, now so that will delete everything on this layer, only on this layer, except the passport. So now when we press delete, the background is gone. And we can press Control D now to deselect everything. Let's come over to Photopea and do the same thing. Let's find it on here. If you can't see it, right click, there we go, and it's this one here. Now this one's not quite so accurate, so it's looking for patterns that follow a similar shape. So we may need to experiment a little bit. So this one's not quite so good in Photopea. Let's try a different way. We could either use the magnetic lasso. Now that will stick to, hence the magnet, and then follow the outline shape. So if we come to here, we can do it very, very slowly. And when, for example, every so on, when we get to a corner, we can click and drag it round. So that might work, but it's quite slow, it's quite laborious, and it might not be so accurate. Let's give it a try. Particularly when you have things like shadows. And then again, select the inverse, delete. Oh, it's done a fairly good job. Let's have a look at how else we could do it. Maybe the other tool we can use is the magic wand. Okay, let's try this one. So we've got our magic wand tool selected here. And is this going to find it? So as you can see, as we move over it, it's trying to look for the image. Select, inverse. Not quite so good that time. So maybe in Photopea we'll stick with the magnetic lasso tool, but obviously, but please do try an experiment. Maybe we can try the quick selection tool as well. Actually, that looks to have done a fairly good job. Let's try this. Yeah, if we've used the quick selection tool around the outside, it's done a fairly good job. Let's try. So select, inverse. Actually, I think apart from that little corner down there, we could be happy with that. Now, if ever you don't see, we've got our select tool up here, but if ever you don't see the arrows to move it, make sure you've got the transform controls ticked there. And this will give you our outline box. So now we can move it, change it, rotate it to suit our image. And the same goes in Photoshop as well. Select tool here, make sure you got the show transform tools box selected so that we can see what we want to do. And now we can change the size. If we hover over the corner, we can rotate it, or we can make it smaller. Okay. So we've looked at layers. Always name your layers, give them a suitable name, and often you might find one selection tool doesn't work as effectively as another. So do try. Remember, you've got things like the object selection tool, quick selection tool, and the magic wand. But also, if you need to do it by hand, you can use the tools such as the lasso or the magnetic lasso as well.